We've spent this week asking, who is this man? Who is this Jesus? What is it that makes Jesus Jesus? When we look at the person of Jesus, what do we see? And we're asking this question because I think God has this vision for humanity. He has a vision for what it looks like for me to relate rightly to creation, what it looks like for me to live in right relationship with people around me, and what it looks like for me to live in right relationship with Him. And I'm convinced that when we look on the person of Jesus, we see God's vision for what it means for us to be truly and fully human. So we're asking, who is this Jesus? And when we ask that question, we can't help but respond with the word compassion. Jesus is a compassionate man. We see this so much in Jesus' interaction with people on the margins of society, the widows, the orphans, the tax collectors, the sinners, the unclean. The way that Jesus interacts with these people is so often described as compassionate. There's this story in Luke 7 that really captures what it means for Jesus to have been a compassionate man. Luke writes this: "Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, 'Do not weep.' Then Jesus came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still, and he said to the young man, 'I say to you, arise.' And the dead man began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother." There's this phrase in that story from Luke that's really easy to overlook if we're not paying close attention. This phrase that Luke writes, "and the Lord saw her." I think if we ever hope to understand what it meant for Jesus to have been a compassionate man, we've got to understand what Luke is writing when he writes those words. So he says, "and the Lord saw her," and we think, well, of course the Lord saw this widow. Jesus was walking into town on the road, and this woman was coming out of Nain, traveling on the same road, and they passed by each other. Of course, Jesus sees this grieving widow. Of course, Jesus sees this group of people who's grieving alongside this widow. Of course, they see each other. They passed each other on the road. But what if Luke's saying much more when he writes that phrase? What if Luke's talking about much more than physical sight, something far greater than Jesus simply seeing this woman with his eyes? What if Luke's actually talking about Jesus experiencing this woman, letting this woman's hurts and anguishes and woundedness really get inside of him? Maybe on the road outside of Nain, Jesus sees this woman for exactly who she is, a widow with a wounded heart from the loss of her son. Maybe Jesus took this journey to Nain just so he could walk this road with this widow. I think this idea that Jesus experiences people is really key to what it meant for him to be compassionate. And it's really key for what it means for us to be compassionate. The reality of a compassionate Jesus means that Jesus looks at us, and he doesn't just look at us, he experiences what we experience. He experiences our joy, our triumphs, our sufferings, our difficulty. He experiences my joys, my sufferings, my difficulty, your joys, your sufferings, and your difficulty. And the reality of a compassionate Jesus, it offers me a promise, but it also calls me into being a compassionate person. You see, the reality of a compassionate Jesus tells me that I am a man and that you are a man or you are a woman who's truly seen, a man or a woman that Jesus experiences life alongside of. But the reality of a compassionate Jesus, it also draws me into being a compassionate person. It tells me that I need to really see and experience the hurts, the struggles, the pains of another. That's what it means for me to be compassionate as Jesus was compassionate. So this morning, this day, we're offering random acts of kindness cards in the prayer room. And these kindnesses aren't about you just simply being kind to someone. It's about you really beginning to see and perceive need around you, really beginning to see and perceive people and places in this place, this town, this Lincoln that we call home. I think really experiencing people lies at the heart of the compassion of Jesus. And this compassionate Jesus, it offers me a promise, and it draws me into a way of life. It offers us a promise and draws us into a way of life. You see, a compassionate Jesus promises that I'm really seen, that Jesus sees us for us, but it also draws me into being someone who really sees. It draws us into being people who really see, who join people in this journey of life, who see people in the midst of their struggle and their difficulty and their woundedness. You see, a Jesus who is compassionate promises that we are seen, but it also draws us into being the kinds of people who really see, who really experience the life of another.